So what I'd like to do today is to share our experience with open sourcing eComp, working with the community, explain a bit about the challenges that we face on a daily basis, and offer you the mitigations that we find that works best. Just before we start, a short introduction, just so you'll better understand the perspective that I have. So as I was introduced, I'm Director of Research and Technology Management in AT&T's R&D Center in Israel. And in my group, we're managing various applications for AT&T's software-defined network. Two of them belong to eComp, hence they belong to ONUP. Those two are SDC, the Service Design and Creation Platform, and the other one is VID, which is the Ops portal for VNF Lifecycle Management. We maintain the PTL, the Project Tech Lead position in both applications. We've just recently contributed the fast layer to the Acrano Edge stack, and we are doing our first steps contributing to Awesome. Now, it's not a secret that network is AT&T's core business. It has been like that in the past few decades. We provide the connectivity, both wireless and wireline, and we provide the services on top of that connectivity, just ready to name a few: internet access, VPN, SD-WAN, 5G, and many more. Now, around two years ago, AT&T made a conscious decision to open source eComp, and it had many good reasons. For example, AT&T wanted to set up a telco-grade platform where eComp is its basis. We wanted to increase the platform evolution by adding, and the feature velocity by adding additional developers from the community. We wanted to promote the common VNF requirements through a working reference implementation. We wanted to establish something which we call the ONUP certification. So if a VNF goes through the entire pipeline of ONUP, you can declare it as an ONUP certified. And in the spirit of Bell Labs, we also wanted to assist the academic research in the relevant areas. So we were in control of our network. We were in full control of our network. We determined what goes in, when, and how. But once open sourcing the platform, now we have many more stakeholders to our network. Those stakeholders are coming from the different areas of the industry. Some of them are service providers like us. Some of them are service integrators, some of them VNF vendors, and some of them OEMs. You have the list here. Obviously, it's not a complete list of who is a stakeholder in ONUP. You all know the logos behind me. The reason I put them here is I just went over the companies that contributed code in the last 3 months. These are the ones from the top of that list. So you can see that we have many stakeholders. So how do you remain in control of your network once you have so many stakeholders? So I'm going to offer the mitigations. We face those challenges, some of them by changing processes, and some of them by using technology best practices. So let's go over the challenges. The first challenge, so the roadmap and the feature set of the platform are no longer determined by AT&T, obviously. There's a community, and they're determined in a democratic fashion. Now, the challenge here is that it's not always relevant, not always top priority. Sometimes it's not even relevant to AT&T. So what do you do in order to mitigate that challenge? There are a few things you should do. The first is influence by involvement. It has a few aspects to that. First, you should contribute code. I mentioned a minute ago, the list of code contributions. So on the top of that list, you'll find AT&T. So 30% of the code contribution in the last 3 months were originated from AT&T. The other way to influence is you should attend meetings. There are a lot of meetings, architecture meetings, project meetings, TSC meetings. You should be there, and you should speak your mind in those meetings. And the last aspect of that is there are elections every once in a while in ONUP, and you should vote. Another way to mitigate is to send your best. Managing communities is a skill set. Not everyone can actually do that. You have to send the people that know how to manage communities, how to influence, and basically know how to explain why they know how to insist. Basically the best people that know how to convey your message. Another aspect of another mitigation to that challenge is you'll have to choose your battles, okay? Not everything is super critical, but when it does, insist in order to make things happen the way you think they should. The next challenge is that we cannot control what interests the other stakeholders, and we definitely don't know their level of commitments and the level of code contribution. So the mitigation here is actually pretty straightforward. You have to collaborate. I've mentioned earlier all those meetings. You have to attend. You have to collaborate. You have to reach mutual understandings with all the other stakeholders. Once you do that, you can plan your resources you can plan them accordingly and realistically in order to match the plans of the other stakeholders. The next challenge that we have is, as you know, ONUP was a merger of two big projects. One of them was AT&T's eComp, and the other one was OpenO. But now we have many components coming from different vendors, and there's a real potential of the platform becoming a Tower of Babel. So in order to avoid that, you really have to have one single solid information model and the data model which is derived from that information model. Once you have that model, you have an agreed way to convey data between the applications, between the platform components. You can establish clear roles and responsibilities between the platform components. And this data model obviously the information and data model obviously need to support the future growth of the platform, its capabilities, and its flows. The next challenge, and hopefully nobody would kill me by saying that, it's a challenge to follow the standards and the standardization organizations. Mainly when we speak about, for ONUP, ETSI is relevant, Oasis is relevant, but what makes it challenging? So the first aspect of this challenge is that the cadence of those organizations doesn't always necessarily is in line with the pace which is needed for the industry, which is needed for this kind of a platform. And the other aspect is that the agendas, they don't always align. So in order to mitigate those challenges, you have a couple of things you need to do. First, if you can, then please do follow these standards. But it is very important that you maintain those standards on the boundaries of your platform, on the interfaces with the outer world. Because, for example, if we'll go to use cases like vendor to vendor or ONUP to, I don't know, to OSM, then you need to maintain those standards on the boundaries. But you have to do what's best for your platform and maintain your flexibility within the platform. The next challenge, and this is really a daily battle, and we are struggling with that a lot. There is a battle to maintain one single code base for the internal code which gets deployed into the AT&T network and the external code that gets into ONUP. Now, we would like to avoid painful upstream and downstream code merges. And I would like to explain why isn't it straightforward. So there are a couple of reasons. Why do we even have this challenge? So the first reason is what we call in AT&T, we call it the AT&T secret sauce. So there are functions, business logics, features, which we would like to have internally in our network, but we do not want to expose them to the community. I think it's only fair. The second aspect here is that are sometimes legal security issues or aspects that prevents you from uploading your code to the community, to the Linux Foundation repositories. There's something we call technology divergence. It's mainly around the tool set, mainly around CI/CD pipelines and testing automation frameworks. So the tool set which is being used in ONUP by and dictated by the Linux Foundation are not always the same as what we use internally in AT&T. And the last aspect here is that, again, what we call cherry picking. So things get developed in ONUP. Not necessarily, we don't necessarily need everything, so this process is called cherry picking. So all of these makes it really hard to maintain one single code base, but luckily there are ways to mitigate that. So the first mitigation, you would want your code, or you would want your architecture to be pluggable and decoupled. So it would enable both the community contributions and the code which is being developed internally. Examples for these architecture patterns, first of all, the microservices, you all know them, small deployable pieces of dedicated business logic. There are other design patterns, and sorry for maybe being too technical, but UI resource bundles, facade, adapters, dynamic loading of libraries which contain the business logic, and feature toggles, those little flags that control which code gets executed in which environment. Another way to mitigate this challenge is you really want your code to be 100% covered with automatic tests, because you really want your developers to be sure that no functionality got broken after such a downstream process. This is what we call the safety net, really super important. Another mitigation, again, what we call the ONUP first. So there are some libraries or some features or some pieces of code that we develop in an ONUP first fashion, which means that we develop them directly to the Linux Foundation repos without going first through the AT&T's repositories. Again, this is not something we can do for many features, but we do that. And once you have such a library, then internally we treat it as if it was a third-party library, although it was developed by AT&T. And the last mitigation here is obviously whenever you can and whenever it's reasonable, then you should adopt the community toolset. The last challenge here is that you would want to preserve the software architecture and the coding best practices that you believe in and that you promote, at least in the components that you own. Now, in order to do that, first, we would like, and we do maintain leadership in those areas where we care most. Two examples for this leadership. One, I've mentioned earlier the PTLs, the project tech lead. So the project tech lead is basically an all-around player. He's the team lead of the component, he's the architect, he's the product owner, he's a project manager, and he is responsible for the well-being of the component. So I mentioned earlier, we do maintain two PTLs, one in SDC and one in VID, and for us it is very important. The other way of maintaining this leadership is there are many subcommittees, and whenever it's important, you should be the chair of that subcommittee. Another way to mitigate this challenge is to have thorough review processes. One is upfront, the design reviews before code even gets developed. And the other one is the implementation review, and that's before code gets committed to the Linux Foundation repositories. And the last The last bullet here is you should really practice what you preach. You should lead by example. If you won't preserve yourself those standards that you've set, easily nobody else would do that for you. And with that, I thank you, and if any questions, I'm willing to answer. Thank you.